There are places on this planet where the maps fade, where roads end in silence, and where visitors are not just unwelcome, they are forbidden. In Myanmar, a land often shrouded in mist and mystery, lie villages so secluded and off-limits that even speaking their names aloud can stir unease. These are places no foreigner is allowed to enter, not because of natural dangers, but because of secrets, deep, unresolved, and closely guarded. But what could be so threatening in a village? Why would a government go to such lengths to hide ordinary lives from the rest of the world? Is it military strategy? Is it shame? Or something far more complicated? Today, we attempt the impossible, to bring you as close as any outsider has ever come to these forbidden zones. We'll trace whispers carried from remote valleys, examine traces left behind in satellite imagery, and listen to the quiet voices of those who've seen what lies within. These stories are rare, not because no one wants to tell them, but because few are ever allowed to listen. Myanmar's restricted villages are not blank spots by accident. They are scars of war, shadows of history, and signals of a struggle that has never really ended. And understanding what lies behind their closed gates means peeling back generations of conflict, betrayal, and survival. The silence isn't peaceful. It's enforced. This is not a journey of travel. It's a journey of revelation. Step by step, we will uncover how these hidden places came to be locked away, what life still exists inside them, and why those in power would rather we never know. And the story begins long before these villages were closed. It begins in the troubled heart of Myanmar's past, when the seeds of today's silence were first sown, through war, colonialism, and power that refuses to let go. To understand why parts of Myanmar remain invisible to the outside world, you have to go back, not decades, but centuries. Myanmar, once known as Burma, has always been a land of many peoples. From the highlands to the Irrawaddy Delta, dozens of ethnic groups lived in relative isolation, forming their own languages, traditions, and beliefs. And while that diversity created a rich cultural mosaic, it also laid the groundwork for deep divisions. When the British arrived in the 19th century, they didn't just conquer, they divided. Through a strategy known as divide and rule, colonial rulers categorized, ranked, and separated ethnic groups. They favored some, marginalized others, and ignited rivalries that hadn't existed before. What was once a loose collection of coexisting communities became a map of suspicion and resentment. The seeds of ethnic conflict were planted long before the country's borders were ever closed. After independence in 1948, Myanmar's newfound freedom didn't come with unity. Instead, it descended almost immediately into civil conflict. Ethnic armies formed to fight for autonomy. The central government, dominated by the Bamar majority, responded with military force. And year after year, the fighting continued, not in the cities, but in the jungles and mountains, far from view. In these hidden battlefields, entire villages became war zones, caught between rebel groups and government troops, burned, emptied, or quietly erased. Then, in 1962, a military coup changed everything. General Ne Win seized power and turned Myanmar into one of the most isolated countries on Earth. Borders closed. Foreign media was expelled. Entire regions were marked as no-go zones. Under this regime, secrecy wasn't just a tool, it was a strategy. And silence became policy. For the next 50 years, Myanmar existed behind a curtain. While the rest of the world moved into the information age, this country fell deeper into censorship and control. People disappeared. Villages vanished from maps. Schools stopped teaching critical history, and rumors replaced facts. In the vacuum of truth, myth and fear grew. A nation that once saw itself as a crossroads of Asia became a darkened room with the curtains drawn tight. The army, known as the Tatmadaw, became not just the state's protector, but its gatekeeper. They controlled who could speak, who could travel, and what the world could see. And in the far corners of the country, places like Kachin State, Rakhine, and Shan, this meant total blackout. Human rights abuses, displacement, secret prisons, and forced labor were all whispered about, but rarely confirmed. The truth became something to be feared. Even during short-lived periods of democratic reform in the 2010s, these regions remained off limits. Peace talks would begin, ceasefires would be signed, foreign journalists would be allowed brief access, but the deepest places, the ones holding the oldest wounds, stayed locked. Why? Because the past never ended. It simply went quiet. The army never truly let go. Today, even with smartphones and satellite eyes, much of Myanmar's history remains buried in these locked-down lands. What we know is fragmented. What we don't know is immense. And as long as those who hold power see transparency as a threat, the truth will continue to live behind checkpoints, guarded by rifles, and spoken only in hushed voices. But the reasons for these closures are not just buried in the past, they're alive in the present. They're political, strategic, and in many ways, personal. Understanding why requires peeling back the current machinery of control. And that begins with one simple but dangerous question. Why are these places still closed? Officially, the reasons given for restricting access to certain villages in Myanmar are almost always the same: safety, security, and national stability. But behind those vague words lies a complex web of deeper motives, each rooted in decades of power dynamics, fear, and a desire to control not just land, but narratives. At the surface, the government claims these regions are dangerous due to ongoing armed conflict or ethnic tensions. And in some cases, that's true. Skirmishes between ethnic militias and the military do flare up. Roads are mined, and ceasefires are fragile. But if it were only about safety, these restrictions would lift when fighting ends. They don't. In reality, these closures serve multiple purposes. For one, they prevent foreign journalists, investigators, and aid organizations from witnessing what's happening. When a village is closed, so is the possibility of independent verification, of war crimes, of forced displacement, of cultural erasure. In that silence, anything can happen without consequence. The world simply doesn't see. Then there's the matter of resource control. Many of Myanmar's most restricted areas sit atop vast deposits of jade, timber, rare earths, and hydropower potential. Ethnic minorities often inhabit these lands, and their resistance, militarized or not, is a challenge to both economic exploitation and state dominance. By closing off these areas, the military ensures uninterrupted access to valuable resources while suppressing dissent without international scrutiny. There's also a cultural dimension. Some of these forbidden villages belong to ethnic groups whose very identity is viewed as a threat. Their traditions, languages, and beliefs don't align with the dominant narrative promoted by the state. Rather than allow these cultures to thrive openly, authorities bury them behind roadblocks. In doing so, they not only erase the present but attempt to reshape the memory of the past into something more manageable. Fear also plays a role. Deep, generational fear. Not just fear of the enemy, but of the outsider. In Myanmar, history has taught those in power that openness brings danger. Colonization came from abroad. So did sanctions, criticism, and pressure. The instinct to shut doors has become a reflex, and the price of keeping them shut has become normalized, accepted even by many within. Even among ordinary soldiers tasked with guarding these places, there's often little understanding of the politics at play. They're told to stop people, search them, turn them away. No explanations are given because none are needed. The rules exist simply because they do. Power here doesn't explain itself. It demands obedience without pause. Some closures are also tied to specific incidents. A massacre, a crackdown, a land grab, moments that spark international outrage. In response, the government doesn't open up. It doubles down. Villages are emptied, roads are sealed, and anyone asking questions is accused of threatening national unity or worse, treason. And finally, there's image. The government of Myanmar, especially under military rule, is obsessed with control over how the country is perceived. By keeping certain areas hidden, it crafts a version of reality that aligns with its goals. Inaccessible villages become non-existent problems, and those who live there, their silence becomes compliance, at least on paper. This combination of reasons, strategic, economic, cultural, and psychological, creates a vast and deliberate curtain. Pulling it back is dangerous, but understanding it is essential. Because what lies beyond that curtain isn't just the story of a village. It's the story of a nation grappling with its identity, its wounds, and its future. And it's in these forbidden regions, among the ethnic communities pushed to the edges of maps, that we begin to see not just why access is denied, but who, exactly, the world is being kept from seeing. The curtain of restriction in Myanmar falls most heavily on its borderlands, regions defined not only by geography, but by ethnicity. Here, in the hills and forests far from the capital, entire communities have lived for centuries, often disconnected from central rule. But over the decades, what began as marginalization evolved into outright exclusion. One of the most tightly controlled areas is Kachin State, in the far north. Bordering China and rich in jade, this region is home to the Kachin people, an ethnic minority with a long history of Christian missionary influence and strong tribal identity. The Kachin Independence Army, or KIA, has fought the military for autonomy since the 1960s. Ceasefires come and go, but the mistrust runs deep. Villages here are regularly off-limits. Even locals need permission to travel between townships. Satellite images have shown entire communities flattened after clashes, but few foreigners have ever seen them up close. And those who try often find themselves turned away at armed checkpoints, their cameras confiscated, their footage deleted. To the west lies Chin State, rugged and remote. The Chin people, many of whom converted to Christianity generations ago, have faced decades of neglect. Roads are poor, infrastructure nearly non-existent, and state services minimal. But it isn't just poverty that keeps this area hidden. It's what lies beneath: resistance. The Chin National Army has long opposed central authority, demanding respect for their way of life. Even though the Chin are not widely involved in ongoing conflict, their lands remain locked down. Visitors face permits, escorts, and surveillance. When a cyclone hit in recent years, aid workers struggled to get in, not because of the storm, but because of bureaucracy that served as a convenient wall. Further south is Shan State, one of the largest and most complex territories in Myanmar. Shan is not home to one people, but many. Shan, Pa'o, Ta'ang, Lahu, and more. These groups have long histories of migration, trade, and self-governance, but they also have histories of conflict, with each other and with the military. Shan State is laced with opium roots, militia zones, and secretive military outposts. It's a place where multiple factions claim power, and the central government responds by restricting movement, limiting access, and avoiding transparency. Foreigners are rarely allowed beyond the main towns. Villages deeper inside often exist in a legal gray zone, neither fully recognized nor entirely erased. Some are still shown on maps, but reaching them is nearly impossible. But perhaps the most infamous region of all is Rakhine State, home to the Rohingya. This Muslim minority, though rooted in the land for generations, is officially considered stateless by the Myanmar government. Denied citizenship, stripped of rights, and confined to ever-shrinking areas, the Rohingya have endured some of the most visible and most violent repression in recent memory. In 2017, after an attack on military posts, the army launched a brutal crackdown. Entire villages were torched. More than 700,000 fled to Bangladesh. And to this day, much of northern Rakhine remains sealed. Journalists are blocked. Investigators are detained. Even humanitarian groups are forced to navigate a maze of red tape and surveillance just to deliver basic aid. The closure of these regions is not just strategic, it's symbolic. It sends a message to ethnic minorities. You are not seen, and if you are, it is on our terms. It also sends a message to the world. Interference is not welcome. For the military, control over these lands is about more than territory. It's about domination of memory, culture, and future. Identity becomes something not to be celebrated, but to be managed, and when inconvenient, erased. What happens when a place is denied visibility for so long? Languages begin to fade. Traditions lose their context. Children grow up without documentation, without proof they ever existed in the eyes of the state. And stories, those vital threads of identity, begin to vanish. That's what's at stake in these forbidden regions. Not just control, but cultural extinction through silence and abandonment. There are whispers of resistance still. Teachers who pass down banned histories in secret. Monks who cross checkpoints to deliver food. journalists who sneak out footage on memory cards hidden in soap bars, families who cross borders on foot just to have their voices heard. But these acts are fragile, and in a country where being caught with a notebook can mean years in prison, bravery comes at an unimaginable price. These ethnic regions, Kachin, Chin, Shan, Rakhine, represent more than battlegrounds or border zones. They represent what Myanmar could be if it embraced its diversity instead of silencing it. But for now, they remain stitched into the national fabric like scars to those who know where to look. And so we ask, what would we see if the walls fell tomorrow? What truths have been buried beneath years of secrecy, fear, and isolation? In our next section, we explore rare glimpses, first-hand accounts, satellite data, and fleeting signals that give us insight into daily life inside these locked-away villages. When a village disappears from public maps, it doesn't vanish from reality. Life goes on, quietly, cautiously, and often without acknowledgement. Inside Myanmar's restricted zones, daily life is shaped not only by geography or tradition, but by the invisible presence of surveillance and the very visible absence of rights. Getting information from these places is difficult by design. Foreign media is banned. Internet access is heavily filtered or non-existent. Locals are warned not to speak. But still, fragments slip through. Texts smuggled across borders. Satellite images showing new structures or burned-out ruins. Rare interviews with defectors and aid workers who've seen more than they were supposed to. These fragments, though incomplete, paint a sobering picture. In some villages, life carries on under quiet strain. Farmers plant rice. Children walk to makeshift schools. Markets open, but all under watchful eyes. Soldiers pass in trucks. Informants linger at tea stalls. Families teach children what not to say. It's not constant violence that defines these places, but the looming threat of it. Other villages bear deeper scars. Some have checkpoints at their entrances. Others live under curfews. In Rohingya areas of Rakhine, whole communities are fenced in. Daily life runs on permission slips, suspicion, and fear of arrest. Medical care is limited. Livelihoods falter. And from afar, the lack of footage looks like peace. There are also ghost villages, homes still standing but empty. Some fled. Others were relocated. Many are missing. In Shan and Kachin, satellite images show new rows of buildings with no roads, possible military posts or resettlement zones. But without access, the truth stays blurry. Local NGOs sometimes get through. They speak of hunger from isolation, mothers giving birth without clinics, teachers without books, youth cut off from the world, and always the fear of soldiers, of raids, of silence turned deadly. The emotional toll is heavy. People describe a spiritual fatigue. Not just fear, but the ache of being unseen. Relatives are out of reach. Ceremonies happen in secret. Life shrinks under surveillance. Religion still anchors many communities. In Chin and Kachin, churches become shelters and schools. In Rohingya villages, mosques, where allowed, are cultural lifelines. But these too are targets. Raids are common. Control over belief becomes another form of power, yet resistance lives on. A grandmother telling stories in a banned language. A boy learning ancestral script. A song passed quietly. In a place where identity is policed, such moments become acts of defiance. Technology is a double-edged sword. Phones document abuse and connect people, but also risk exposure. Photos, messages, contacts can lead to arrest. Still, people risk it. Shaky footage and whispered interviews make it out. Reminders that silence isn't consent. Aid is tightly controlled. International workers operate under watch. Supplies are monitored, censored, delayed. In Chin, volunteers carry medicine by foot to avoid patrols. Help comes slowly and always at a cost. But life continues. Couples marry, kids play, fields are sown, stories are told. Even behind wire and checkpoints, people refuse to disappear. These are not invisible people. They are forcibly hidden. Their survival is quiet resistance. In the next section, we meet the outsiders who try to breach these walls. Journalists, aid workers, and others who risked everything to witness what lies behind no entry signs. For every closed gate, someone tries to cross it. In Myanmar, Outsiders, journalists, aid workers, curious travelers have long tried to see what's hidden. Few succeed, but their efforts reveal how fiercely the silence is protected. One of the most known cases is that of Reuters reporters Wa Lone and Kaya Soeu. In 2017, they investigated a Rohingya massacre. They gathered witness accounts and photos implicating the military. The state charged them under the Official Secrets Act. They were jailed for 7 years. Global outcry finally secured their release after 500 days. Their case made one thing clear: even minimal exposure is punished. Others try more quietly. NGOs like Médecins Sans Frontières and Save the Children have attempted to work in restricted zones, but their access is limited. Authorities demand control over distribution, photos, and records. Some groups were expelled after resisting censorship. The result is compromised aid, present, but not truly free. Some freelancers travel in disguise, posing as tourists. But checkpoints are thorough. A filmmaker trying to visit Kachin was arrested and deported. His footage was never returned. Even diplomats struggle. UN officials are delayed, denied, or offered access only after the moment has passed. Delay becomes erasure. Technology helps from a distance. Satellites show burned villages and new military structures, but they lack human context, and without it, evidence is too easily dismissed. Inside the country, locals trying to share these truths face grave danger. Citizen journalists are arrested, tortured, or disappeared. The less the world knows, the easier control becomes. And silence, when enforced, becomes the most dangerous weapon. Still, the attempts continue, because silence enables impunity, and breaking it is the first step toward justice. Some reporters keep returning, working with trusted contacts or just hoping to get lucky. Many fail, but each effort is a defiance, a refusal to let darkness win. Even when access is granted, what outsiders see is carefully staged. Tours are rehearsed, villagers warned. It's not truth, it's a performance. Just enough light to claim transparency, but not enough to expose reality. In the next section, we turn to those who know this silence best. Not outsiders, but insiders. The ones who risk everything just to whisper the truth. In Myanmar's sealed-off villages, truth survives in whispers. Behind checkpoints and jungle paths, people speak in fragments. No names, few dates, always in private. But even whispers carry weight. A man in Kachin recalls soldiers burning homes near the church. They didn't ask questions, he says. His village is gone from maps. He stayed because he had nowhere else to go. Even if they erase it, he says, I still know where my house stood. A teacher in Shan describes a school with no books. We don't teach real history, she says. If we do, we disappear. Her students learn math, basic science, and how to stay silent around soldiers. In Rakhine, a Rohingya man shares a sketch. Fences, guards, one path in or out. We can leave, he says, but sometimes they just say no. His son was barred from university, not for grades, but ethnicity. A woman in Chin says, we're not waiting anymore, we're just surviving. Her family hasn't seen medical aid in months. Her phone is both her lifeline and a threat. We delete everything weekly, she says, but not all stories are sad. In Kachin, women meet to sew traditional clothes banned in schools. A monk in Shan teaches forbidden history. A teenage girl tells how her father hid banned books in clay pots. These fragments, though careful and sometimes conflicting, form a deeper truth, that even in silence, memory resists. Identity survives, and the will to hope remains unbroken. As we near the end of this journey, we're left with what's not just seen, but what refuses to stay hidden. In our final section, we return to one last truth, the one the powerful fear most, that silence can be broken. Some places are silent not by nature, but by force. In Myanmar, closed villages aren't empty. They're hidden, not forgotten, but buried by power and fear. We've come as close as we can. We've heard voices who risked everything. We've seen how control of land becomes control of truth. But these villages still breathe. They remember. To close a village is to close a future. But the human spirit endures in whispered songs, buried books, and stubborn memories. So the real question isn't why these places are hidden. It's how long the world will let them stay that way. Because silence only serves the powerful. And the first step to change is to break it. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe for more untold truths and help shine light on the places the world is told to forget.